make an announcement? Hello? Okay. The coffee break is being served outside at the claustro, which is the little porch outside. Okay? So you can find your coffee there.
Spengo, lascia acceso? Lo spengo, lo lascia acceso?
Inviting me to creations. In just Peru, governments will meet at this year's UN Climate Change Conference. They
Ladies and gentlemen, I commend the Club de Madrid and the Robert F. Kennedy Center for coming together to discuss the state and future of democracy worldwide. The topic has never been more timely. The threats to democracy around the world are all too real. We see the loss of freedom of expression their parents.
I don't mind having it here. No, it's fine. I'm not going to move around anyway. Thanks.
Hello? Well, good evening. This is the last panel. Thanks for the patience and the tolerance. It's been a long couple of days. I've never spent so much time in a university as when I spent a couple of years at a university. This last 2 days, Romano Prodi said that when the spaghetti is long, the speeches have to be short. I know that the drinks that are coming are very strong, so the speeches will try to keep them short this evening. I unfortunately will not be able to socialize too much with Presidente Calderón or Lagos from Chile or Hurtado from Ecuador as we're facing each other in the America Soccer Cup coming up. The draw was done today, so this is about as close as we will get until we settle it on the field. They have a much better team, of course. Thank you for this, for attending this event. The partners on this, the RFK Center, the EUI University, Bertelsmann, for all the inputs they provided. I very much appreciated the format of the regional groups. I think it was very effective. It was a little bit like The Economist magazine that has the regional editions, and it's easier when you're grouped by regions to have a more fruitful conversation. At least I found that in the group of the Americas. Just in introducing the panel, just 2 quick comments on what we're trying to do here. First, democracy and human rights in decline. Perhaps the question should have been democracy or human rights in decline, because you can certainly show that one can decline faster or not at the same rate as the other. I think some principles are long-standing and they will last forever. I think we need to move to democracy beyond just free and fair elections. The greatness of people like Nelson Mandela tend to clarify and simplify things. If Mandela's in jail, there's no democracy, there's no human rights. When Mandela's free, he's president, there's democracy and there's human rights. It's a little more complex than that in countries that don't have that kind of leadership. And free and fair elections are one element of it. I would submit to you that in many countries, we have elections that are not very free, somewhat unfair, and we certainly do not have the rest of the elements that would constitute a democracy. Independent institutions, where they're not run by the person in power. If you go to a country where the tenure of the president is longer than the tenure of the electoral court authorities or the Supreme Court or the prosecuting attorneys or the central bank, that's probably not the definition of independent institutions, and those are red, at least, if not red lights, at least flashing yellow lights on what we should look out for democracy. Freedom of the press, the president of Brazil, Dilma Rousseff, has a very good phrase, a little better than Jefferson's, even if I may say so. Says, I prefer the noise of democracy than the silence of a dictatorship, equating freedom of expression with democracy, which is central in our countries. And then, of course, there's a couple more elements that a democracy needs. If we comment in the Americas group, we call it the Sarney rule. The first president after military dictatorships of Brazil was Sarney. And when he was asked what democracy is, he said on the last day of his mandate, what I was doing last night, packing my bags on the established date by the Constitution. By definition, military dictators never knew when the end was coming. They had to fly out in helicopters, or by happenstance now, many governments in power make it a flexible, like a very good credit card. They keep extending the expiration date time and again to stay in power. So some of those things I think are basic, and if you find that you have free and fair elections, independent institutions, freedom of the press, an open opposition, you probably are going to have much better adherence to human rights in general. And the challenges for the next generation democracy, I think are good. I was quite a bit shocked when I first read the term because it was sounding like the flavor of the month type of thing, like who was the Elvis generation, who was the Michael Jackson generation, and who's the Shakira generation, as if democracy had this waves or these different flavors. But clearly, the evolution of democracy brings about new challenges. I don't think we're trying to design the new generation democracy 7, like the iPhone 7 or the Samsung Galaxy 6. I think there's new challenges that the world today brings, but there's some basic
development implies a comprehensive vision of several aspects of human life. One of those aspects is clearly sustainability. And what is the relationship with democracy and human development is if democracy is about expanding freedom, expanding liberties, capacities, and opportunities for the people, sustainability is about expanding those rights of the people, those liberties. For any generation, expanding capacities, opportunities, and liberties, this expansion of freedoms, political freedom, economic freedom, social freedom, implies that that expansion cannot come at expense of compromising the expansion of freedom of the new generations, the people in the future. And that is the key notion of sustainable human development. We can move forward and saying that everybody talks about the several generations of human rights as well. One of those new generations of human rights is exactly the human right to healthy environment. And actually, United Nations, since Stockholm Declarations in 1972, coined this expression of healthy environment as a human right. So this is the first part of my explanations. We are completely on the track of considering environment and healthy environment as human right, and a very important and key. Just from the last meeting in Australia of Club Madrid up now, we had, for instance, the worst typhoon in history in Philippines that killed 6,000 people. 6,000 people were killed by a natural, let me say, natural phenomenon. The worst winter in 100 years in New York in January. The worst floods ever in Scotland in February. The worst drought in California and the worst drought in the north of China this year. And one of the worst hurricanes that destroyed a very important part in Los Cabos in my own country. Those are realities. And regardless of the discussions about any one single of them are related with climate change or not, those are expressions that what is going to happen in the future if we allow the temperature rise at the speed is rising right now. In the last century, second reality that is backed by science, temperature of the land and temperature of the sea increased almost 1 Celsius degrees. And the trend is going to rise up 4 Celsius degrees to the end of this century. Third, this global temperature has several impacts. For instance, it is demonstrated by science as well that the level of the sea is increasing also. And that implies, for instance, that if Greenland and the Antarctic are melted in the next century, that could provoke an increase of 2 meters at least in the level of the sea at global level. Fourth, this global warming is related with climate change. And it is correlated in particular with the carbon emissions produced by human behavior after the Industrial Revolution. Now, if the science has been so evident, if science has rested its case clearly, in my opinion, why we are not taking action globally? And the conclusions that we arrive, and when I say we, I'm talking about the members of the Global Commission on the Economy and Climate, which is integrated by several former head of the state, some of them members of Club de Madrid, like President Ricardo Lagos, or Jens Stoltenberg, or Helen Clark. Several prominent businessmen like Paul Polman from Unilever, Chad Holiday from Bank of America, Don Doctorow from Bloomberg, etc. We came with the conclusion that the main obstacle to take action is the generalized perception that tackling climate change implies huge economic costs that no one government can afford. That's the traditional view. However, several commissioner countries, among them Norway, the UK, Sweden, South Korea, Indonesia, Colombia, and Ethiopia, asked us to organize this commission, who is co-chaired by Nick Stern, Professor Lord Nicholas Stern. We came with a report that we presented last September. And the idea of the report was to explore upon or under a scientific basis if it is possible or it is true that you cannot tackle climate change without economic sacrifices. And the conclusions, several of the conclusions we arrived is, yes, it is possible to tackle climate change and at the same time to have economic growth. It is possible to reduce poverty and at the same time to reduce the climate risk. But you need to have the courage in order to make bold decisions now and those decisions need to change at least 3 big systems in our civilization. The first system is energy. And the idea is we don't pretend to de-energize, if I can use this word, the economic growth. Of course, it's completely needed, the energy, in order to get economic growth. But what is possible is to decarbonize the economic growth. And today, the world has an incredible opportunity that probably it was not present ever before, which is, for instance, the price of renewable energy. Solar energy, wind energy, now is 80% cheaper than it was 7 years ago. There are several countries in which renewable energy sources are equal or cheaper than traditional fossil fuels sources of energy. That is the case a lot of economies that are importing traditional fossil fuels. There are one of the biggest facilities of solar energy in the world now in Chile, because Chile is, instead of importing gas or oil, it is able to produce energy by solar. Even in the case of the United States, there is a contract in Austin in which the contract coming from solar energy is cheaper than the traditional sources of energy in the United States. In energy, saving energy, for instance, implies to get at least half of the total decarbonizations of energy, only taking long-term fruits in which providing saving energy mechanisms to industry or domestic consumption could produce important revenues for companies and could produce important savings for householders. Second system that we need to change is cities. This is probably a model of cities more oriented to the use of individual cars is not affordable in the future. We are expecting that in the next 15 years, there will be more than 1 billion people more in urban developments in the world. That implies to build a city like Washington, D.C. every single month during the next 15 years. And if we don't change that model, it's going to cost not only huge economic cost for the people, but also it could damage dramatically the environment as well. But if we change the model, we can provide more efficient, productive, and with better quality of life cities to the world. And the third system is land uses, which implies to end deforestation and to increase productivity in agricultural sector. And finally, we say that those measures not only could reduce the carbon emission, but also could provide economic benefits in the medium and the long term. Why? And take in consideration these 3 elements, and I will conclude with that. First, the power of innovation. When Europe established regulation related with carbon, either cap and trade or taxes on carbon, the industry invested a lot in innovation. And that explosion of new patents and new inventors and new technologies allow us to enjoy the benefits of knowledge. We must remember that the most important engine in human history has been innovation since millenniums ago. And we can foster innovation as a mechanism to increase economic growth with the right public policies regarding reducing carbon emissions. Second factor of economic growth, second driver of the new economic growth, the new climate economy we are proposing, is investment in infrastructure in the new economy. Why? We are estimating in the Commission that, again, in the next 15 years, human beings need to invest 90 trillion in infrastructure, either in cities, energy, and land uses. Well, if we are going to invest one way or another such amount of money, let's do it the right way. Invest those $90 trillion in the new economy instead of establish a new facility with carbon energy sources. You can establish a new facility probably at the beginning with higher capital costs, but much lower variable costs. Instead of build a new highway for vehicles, to build a new bus rapid transit, the BRT, you can provide better benefit for the people, and you can reduce emission as well. And we are estimating that the difference between one economy and the another in investment in infrastructure is only 4 trillion out of 90 trillion. But at the end of those 15 years, those 4 trillion could be clearly offset by the gains in economic efficiency. And finally, the third one is gaining in the efficiency of natural resources. We have very focused today in order to rebound the economy, trying to increase the capital efficiency or the labor efficiency. Now it's time to rebound the efficiency of natural resources, because underpricing the use of natural resources, either water, either land, either air or carbon, we are canceling an important source of economic growth that the economy needs a lot in this time. So in conclusions, a healthy environment is a human right, and it's part of the new generation democracy we are looking for. Second, the big obstacle so far has been the consideration that it is impossible to tackle climate change and at the same time to provoke economic growth. We conclude the other way around. It is possible to tackle climate change and to get economic growth in the medium term, but we need to take bold decisions now, and that is the role in which Club de Madrid could be involved, promoting, taking decisions and public policies everywhere. So that would be my point.
All right. Where can they find the report? Where can they find the report? Is there a website where they
yes,
can
so
find
it's the New Climate Economy .org, and the New Climate Economy Report.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Presidente Calderón. We now move to former President of Ghana, John Kufuor. I think we're lucky at the Club de Madrid that, well, I used to say in jest that if it was from a soccer standpoint, we'd prefer to be called Club de Barcelona. But the last couple of years, I think Club de Madrid, we're doing okay with Real Madrid now. But we have a point of pride in that, if somebody correct me if I'm wrong, of the 7 UN special envoys on climate change, 6 are Club de Madrid members. I think you're the last one for Africa, President Kufuor, so we look forward to your comments. But it's a point of pride for the Club de Madrid to have many UN special climate change envoys with you, number 6. I think we have number 7 coming up soon, also with Felipe. Please go ahead, sir.
Well, I have been invited to discuss the relationship between global governance and the environment. And I'm happy President Calderon has discussed the climate change and its effects on the environment. and he's an expert in that. But then, how has the world's attention been drawn to take steps to arrest the catastrophic impact of the change on lives and the environment of humanity? It has come about, I would say, on the initiative of the United Nations organization. About 2 decades ago, through the setting up of intergovernmental panel of scientists on climate change, the scientists, through their research, found that something very menacing was creeping on life as we've known it so far, just 2 decades ago. And this menace was detected to be the emissions of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere to destroy the ozone layer and thereby expose the planet Earth to the direct impact of the sun on us. This initially was resisted by many people. They thought the changes in climate were the cause of cosmic operations. But the scientists persisted. And then, just about under 2 decades, some nations met in Kyoto, Japan, and designed the Protocol 1, by which the nations accepted that truly carbon dioxide emissions caused by man through, as we've heard from President Calderon, our industrial operations, through the sprawling cities and the burning of fossil fuels, through transportation, we are really contributing to the cause of the change that is affecting us adversely. This change made predictability of seasons very hazardous. It's not real. You can't predict, even in the most advanced parts of the world. Like recently, you see what's happening in the United States with snowing, covering over 50 states before winter really sets in. It's not something that happens ordinarily and normally at all. When you come to the continent where I come from, Africa, the desert is spreading wildly all over. And places where we used to have dense rainforests are now becoming like grasslands. Farmers are not able to predict the changes of rainfall patterns, so they can't farm as they used to do in the past. There's drought, so there's scarcity of water to irrigate farms. On the coastal areas, we have high waves washing off coastal lands, and with the rising seas, because the glaciers are melting under the onslaught of climate change, even islands, some islands are beginning to sink. These have been known to us, and the United Nations, through the protocols, which started with the Kyoto one, has been persistent and consistent, advising that the nations of the world should sign a legal agreement to commit themselves to contribute to arresting the increasing temperatures to below 2 degrees Celsius by the year 2030. Otherwise, by mid-century, this century, by 2050, life as we've known it so far would become very different, and things might get out of hand altogether, and we would feel like perhaps living in hell. Last year, the Secretary General invited me to accept, to assist him to rally all the heads of state of our world to agree to come to a summit in New York last September, just to deliberate on climate change. So the world would be minded to sign a legal agreement by December next year in Paris, that all of us, both developed and developing, would commit to playing our part to reduce the temperatures that are rising as fast as we've heard from President Calderon to under 2 degrees Celsius by 2030. Because if by 2030, 40, 50, we haven't arrested this rising temperature, then not even our best science and technology might be able to achieve the arrest. And if we are not going to do it, then we can know the consequences. Already we are feeling it with the unpredictability of climate changes. And because of this, because of the UN's ability to organize this summit, which took place, and as many as 120 heads of state attended last September, and businesses attended, cities of the world, and on that regard, the former mayor of New York was invited by Ban Ki-moon also to assist to rally the cities of the world. Everybody attended this summit, and now the world seems to come at one to fight climate change. Fortunately, within the recent meeting of APEC in Asia, United States, that had been suspected along the way to be dragging its feet towards agreeing to sign, and China, the two foremost emitters of carbon dioxide, came out signing an agreement, thereby showing leadership, telling the world that if the United States, with its vast ambitious programs, industrial programs, would sign to restrain itself, and if China, that had also held back, not initially cooperating, would also sign, that really perhaps the single biggest threat to humanity and life as we've known it is climate change, then perhaps the rest of the world would also sign. Those of us from the poorer parts of the world initially refused because we felt we hadn't contributed that much to emissions of climate change. And truly, we don't have the industries. But then we learned that by our indiscriminate destruction of our forest covers, we were destroying carbon sinks, as the scientists tell us, because the forest covers eat up carbon dioxide. But we have been destroying our carbon covers. Ghana, for instance, just 30 years ago, had a forest cover of our land, our territory, of something like 70%. As I speak with you now, Ghana's forest cover is less than 20%. Why? Because we felled off the rainforest and sold into timber for revenue. The trees that would take over 100 years to grow, we destroyed. And now to replace them is a big challenge. And we find what used to be forest has become grassland. And Ghana, I cited Ghana as an example, but it's so all of Africa, and I'm sure in much of the developing world. So with this knowledge, we've come to accept that we too have contributed to the prevalence of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And so Africa is also committed to going to Paris to sign the agreement. I believe it's so with many of the nations in Southeast Asia and also in Latin America. So the whole world is now, as I say, agreeing that mankind must do something to arrest the wild increases. And the leadership that United Nations has given is making the signing of agreement next year to coincide with the coming to the end of the Millennium Development Goals that were launched at the beginning of the century. And this process was launched as I would say, a humanistic and moral step by the United Nations, again led by the United Nations, to stretch an arm to support the poor and hungry of the world. The places of the world afflicted by illness, ignorance, disease, which didn't have much help. But beginning of this century, United Nations managed to convince the world. And fortunately, I would say all the members of the UN signed the Millennium Development Goals, which within the past 15 years have also gone some way to help abate the difficulties that afflicted perhaps most of humanity. Because the developing parts in Africa, Southeast Asia, perhaps are more numerous than the developed parts of the world. Yeah. So the coming together next year of the realization, to some measure, of the Millennium Development Goals and also the possible and very likely signing of the legal agreement on climate change becomes very significant in the history of humanity. Because with that, and with the proposed adoption of sustained development for the world post-2015, we see that our planet and humanity have come to a threshold where we may secure sustained development using renewable sources of energy rather than continuing to burn fossil fuels that stay in the atmosphere to destroy life as we've known it. Again, with this process, we are going to be able to manage the natural resources efficiently, more efficiently than before, because if you are talking of crude oil, coal, and they are exhaustible. But solar energy is not exhaustible. It's renewable. Wave power is not exhaustible. Geothermal might be exhaustible, but it's a new source of energy we're going to use. These are the things that are coming into play, and they are going to unleash new industries, plants that will generate the employment for us. In the process, too, we are talking of partnerships between the developed and developing world. We talk of green funds, which the rich of the world are committing to. So the less well-off would be assisted to access the technologies that the new technologies, as we've learned, would provide, so that we can all then be able to manage climate change in ways that would not leave us poorer like before. We're going to be in a partnership, rich, emerging, and developing all together. We say we are in the same boat, we sail together, or we might sink in face of climate change. This is what is happening, and it is the United Nations that is showing this way, and I believe this is the beginnings of global governance, as the topic given me indicates. And we need to sustain it for us, all of us.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. Okay, now we quickly turn to former Prime Minister of Greece, George, my namesake, Jorge Papandreou. Jorge Papandreou. Sir.
I have the difficult task of trying to think a little bit about the next steps, but I will begin by a short story. When I came here yesterday, I realized I had been here many, many years ago, but then I was a student, but I was also a refugee from a dictatorship in Greece, and I was a member of an organization that was calling for armed struggle to overthrow the dictatorship in Greece. I soon abandoned the belief that armed struggle would be the way forward, and I very much believe that the means and the ends have to be in unison. But it did remind me, with the conversation we heard a little bit earlier, about the fact that there were double standards even in the West. Latin America, of course, we were the one side of the Cold War, there was the other side of the Cold War, and the geopolitics of that often meant that democratic human rights and democratic institutions were denied. After the Cold War, I think we lost in the West, from the West, and when I say the West, it's a term which is somewhat vague. We lost the opportunity, I think, to build a global structure where we would base it on these values of democracy and human rights. And as was said earlier, issues like extraordinary rendition, the Iraq War, and so on, and not only created a sense of double standards, which now, as the power balance has changed with Russia, China, or other countries, geopolitics has reemerged, and it has also allowed for them to say, well, this was just a facade. or it also has allowed for transitioning countries to say, well, it's not really democracy, it's, you know, anti-colonialism, it's anti-West or anti-whatever, which we are fighting for, and even violent means can be used and so on. So I think we need to see how we, as one recommendation, there are a number of new agreements which are being discussed, trade between the EU and the US, the Pacific Rim also, but also our global arrangements. I think we have to, the US, the EU, and of course quite a few of other democracies, some new, some but also mature, need to work together to push forward a more global basis for values. And somebody from the Brookings Institute said something very important, linking the national interests that are the part of the geopolitics with the values. Can we do this? Well, my experience in the European Union is that when we were enlarging, the enlargement process was actually linking national interests of countries and of the rest of the European Union with a value-based ethos, a value-based system of human rights, democracy, and so on. You can become a member, it's very important, but at the same time, it is in your national interest also to be a member that respects these values. Now, can we do this at the global level? I think that climate change might be or can be, or should be used, and from us in the Club of Madrid, as a new dynamic and organizing focal point to be able to converge the national interests of countries with a value system about how we save our planet, how we deal with this common threat. A second point I want to make, just going back to basics and listening to some of the discussions, after leaving the post of Prime Minister, I've had more time to philosophize, and of course that also means going back to some of the ancient Greek philosophers and looking what democracy meant there. And they were really experimenting a lot on all kinds of forms of democracy. And I liked what, Vera, you said 2 days ago about democracy as chipping away at the abuses, I would say, of power. That's what democracy was the invention of, the initial idea that there was abuse of power and democracy was there to stop it. The hubris, as we say in Greek, that was the blasphemy to the gods, was the abuse of power. And of course, on the other hand, the other side of the coin, the use of power in a collective way for the public good, in a positive and imaginative way. And I will come to a very simple concept that I think we need to put in our research when we're doing these discussions. In indices, obviously inequality is one, but I would say also the concentration of power. We are seeing today new centers, new tools that are allowing for concentration of power, from technology to money to media to dogmas. So it's not only government. And that's part of the globalizing part has to do with also the globalizing economy. And I think we need to look and see where we have this concentration of power and therefore see how that power is being used or abused and how it should be more well distributed or controlled. Within that, there was an interesting discussion yesterday in the wider Europe by a Professor Schmitter, who said that one of the problems with democracy today is, in fact, that it's in a different global context, a different context. It's not a national context. We are in a global economy, but still our institutions are local or are national. And that creates an equilibrium, a disequilibrium, an alienation. Our citizens are expecting more from politicians. We have less power, not more power, less capacity in this global society and economy to make decisions that can make a difference. The result is therefore a paradox between our capacity, our existing capacity, but actually our knowledge and experience and resources, but that the institutions that are local and therefore less powerful. And I felt this in with the crisis in Greece, of course, and we, of course, were on the one hand responsible for our own malaise, and it was a question of governance, I believe, also. But it was also the inability of Europe at that moment to quickly react to the market fears in a collective way to protect a process which then exacerbated the problems of our citizens. That's why I think, to come to a recommendation, and sometimes China, maybe because with its its size, but also its capacity to make these decisions, seems, and I would of course agree with so many that say that underneath there are problems, seems to be more able to intervene in these international problems. But why not democracies if we work together? So I would say another recommendation which came out of some of the discussions also, collective regional capacity to mitigate crises, to help to adapt, be resilient to crises, but even to guide in times of crisis for human security, for human rights, for social cohesion, and for equality. A third point I want to make, which I think is important, is that in the developed nations, economically, what we have seen in this globalizing economy is we had a social contract or a basic bargain where capitalists, employers, and government got together to say, we will, yes, this is a capitalist system, open market, but at the same time there are certain obligations for redistribution, for health, education, welfare, and so on, jobs, environment. That, however, with the globalizing of the economy, we have the flight of capital, not only to opportunity, but also the flight from responsibility and obligations. I felt that again in Greece, but it's not just a Greek problem. Tax havens, offshores, tax avoidance, which has of course become a big issue now in Europe, but it's not only a European issue. That is also creating another problem. We are not only undermining the social contract, but we are also creating huge concentration of wealth outside our institutions. That comes back to us in weak countries, in countries with weaker institutions, and captures media, it captures politics, it could be organized crime also. This is not, sometimes it's legal money, sometimes it's illegal money, lobbying or whatever, and really has undermined the capacity of and not only politicians, also it's justice systems and so on, institutions. So I think this is where we need to see a global regulation on this issue and see how the Club of Madrid can really think at the global level for issues of regulation of the markets in a better way. And just to add to what President Calderon said, we have this debate between left and right. Is it the state or is it the market? I usually say it's neither the state or the market. It's a good state against the bad state, and it's a good market, a good, well-regulated or effectively regulated market against a badly regulated market. For example, President Calderon mentioned this, the regulation on carbon in the European Union did create incentives in the market for innovation and for new technology and patents. So a good cooperation, efficient markets, efficient states can work together. Finally, to complement the issues of global and regional responses to how we will strengthen democracy or stop the decline, I think we need to think of new areas of strengthening democracy. Yesterday again, Professor Schmitter talked about the post-liberal democracy. I don't know if that's the best term, but let's think of politics as innovation. Earlier, Ricardo Lagos said, yes, we need to have the capacity to imagine. Well, when politics was invented, if you like, in ancient Greece, it basically was a revelation. It was basically saying, we don't need tyrants, we don't need high priests, we don't need magicians. We can decide on our own fate. We actually have the capacity to change our fate. We are not in this fatalistic hierarchy of powers. And of course, that's why it was bringing in an imagination and then cultivating the skills of our society in order to find solutions. That's the molding, if you like, of the statue. So I would say that we get a lot of discussion about the mistrust of politicians, but there are huge limitations today, and I think we can complement what we have as a representative democracy today with new forms and more innovative forms, imaginative forms of governance. Politics obviously is not simply electing a representative, but we should look at local and regional democracy building, look at what cities can do to be more responsive democracies, NGOs as advisors and help, and also, of course, proponents of different policies. There are then, of course, innovative solutions in deliberation, deliberative polling, deliberative politics, more direct forms of democracy. Use of the internet, someone said yesterday that there's a disruptive force of the internet, but we can use it in a constructive force. We tried this in Greece again through bringing in wiki laws so that there would be more participation on making the laws in Greece, even during the crisis. And of course, this I say because I believe that whether it's in ancient Greece or whether it's in modern democracies and societies, we politicians don't have all the solutions. And I think the Club of Madrid can be very useful because we have the greater freedom to speak out and from our experience, but we can also bring a message that, you know, populists, fundamentalists, dogmatists, authoritarian leaders, they say they have these solutions. And usually that's why in the end they fail. Because if we want sustainable societies, we need everyone to be part of this finding solutions, citizens' participation, and therefore, of course, education and for the participation of citizens. But participation also is an education, and that was the form of education. In ancient Athens, civic participation was an obligation. Public office was an obligation for every citizen. Of course, they hadn't chipped away the slaves and women's rights at that time, but those who were citizens were obliged to participate. And if you weren't participating, you were considered an idiot. And that's where the word comes from, as a matter of fact, a private person in ancient Greece. But that, again, brings me back to our democracies were based, of course, on a common identity, a sense of solidarity. We could identify with each other, whether it's in the polis or in the French Revolution or later on. Can we today, in the diversifying societies, and the fragmenting societies, because of globalization, the diversifying because of migration, because of the fact that we've been brought together more quickly through communication, can we create a global identity? And the Club of Madrid has been talking about this, and it's one of its things, a global ethos and identity, which would be a sense of a global citizenship. Again, I will end on this. Climate change, I think, is a great opportunity if we use the crisis, and we don't back down on this, or we're quick enough, to bring different peoples and nations, actors, business, government, NGOs, together in a focal point to develop a global ethos and use our education systems to bring a moral value that we have capacities, but how we use and not abuse power should be central in our education systems and in our politics. I think, therefore, that is the way to move forward for collective solutions which are democratic and protect our citizens' human rights. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Prime Minister Babandreou. Thank you. Okay, now in the program, time is flying. We had a couple of videos. We can. The first one, if you want to see Cristina Figueres, the video somewhere on the website. I think there's a video, I hope it's very short, of Secretary General Ban Ki-moon. If he speaks too long, we won't give him any wine, so I hope the video is brief. Do we have it? Yeah? 2 minutes? Okay, we give the Secretary General of the UN 2 minutes then.
And the cocktails would be better.
Yeah. I can impersonate him.
Okay, that was very illustrative. Oh.
I commend the Club de Madrid and the Robert F. Kennedy Center for coming together to discuss the state and future of democracy worldwide. The topic has never been more timely. The threats to democracy around the world are all too real. We see the loss of freedom of expression and increasingly restrictive laws. We see persecution of activists and journalists and the exclusion and oppression of civil society. Gatherings like yours are of vital importance in addressing these issues. You are well placed to identify alarming trends and call attention to violations of human rights and fundamental freedoms. Most of all, you can make it clear that there are universal values and principles that governments trample on at their peril. Time and again, we have seen that in societies that are not inclusive, peace, stability, and prosperity cannot take hold. As you launch your drive for next generation democracy, I urge you to look at ways to secure space for young people to engage. Today, they make up the largest generation of young people in history. They are connected and committed like no generation before. The United Nations is ready to work with you to give young people the voice and the room they need to make their contributions to our common progress. I thank all of the distinguished leaders for participating in this dialogue. I count on all of you to be ambassadors for democracy across the world. Grazie mille. Thank you.
Okay. He deserves his drink. Okay, now quickly we turn and close it to Charles Chauvel. I hope I'm not mispronouncing anybody's name. If I do, feel free to mispronounce mine. Parliamentary Development Advisor of the UNDP, considering that we've heard from Mr. Ban Ki-moon. If you could compliment that, please, Charles.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I want to just say a few words from the point of view of the lessons that we've learned at UNDP in our democratic governance promotion programming. We have 70 parliamentary programs that we support around the world. We also support constitutional strengthening, political party strengthening, and support to the election cycle. And I think there are a number of rich lessons learned from that experience. But I also want to draw on my experience as a former elected official. I was a Member of Parliament in New Zealand for 7 years, so I think some of the experiences that I had in public office, albeit at a more junior level than many of you, are relevant to some of these lessons learned as well. And really, I think what I'd like to do is second the suggestion that Kevin Rudd made on Sunday night, that history is certainly not dead. There are competing visions as against a broad and deep democracy. And I think we can draw perhaps 4 lessons from the experience that I've suggested that I want to just posit now. First of all, results actually matter. And this means that when we provide assistance to democratic programming to make it sustainable, then we have to deal with all the issues that arise. We have to foster societal inclusion and participation, economic growth and inclusion, and environmental resilience, as at least our first 2 distinguished speakers pointed out. Good technical assistance to parliaments or to the election cycle is absolutely important and valuable, but if it's carried out in a vacuum, ignoring the political economy, it will fail. Tunisia was an example that was mentioned in the earlier report back, and Tunisia is remarkable for the successes that it's achieved since 2010, and I'm very proud of the assistance that UNDP was able to provide it. But it is also true, as I think an earlier speaker observed, you can't eat a constitution. And the reality of Tunisia, as one of the distinguished members of parliament from there who's here today knows, unless we support the amazing efforts that the Tunisian people made to get to a democratic settlement, the only one out of the Arab awakening, by ensuring that their economy is supported, by ensuring that there's absorptive capacity for all the unemployed youth in Tunisia, then there's no way that that democratic experiment will be able to be sustained. So we do have to look at holistic solutions when we provide assistance to a democracy, and the economy and the environment matter as much as getting governance right. Second suggestion, or lesson learned, empower women and girls. And I think this is a particularly pertinent lesson for today, the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women. All our experience shows that societies that encourage the fullest participation of women and girls are wealthier and more peaceful. Now, the Club de Madrid's membership criteria are a matter for it and it alone, but one might hope that on this score it would think very carefully about a future offer of membership to President Erdogan in light of his comments yesterday. Lesson 3, and this is, I think, the third time this lesson has been pointed out: avoid double standards. The world is watching to see whether those of us who profess democracy practice what we preach. We are held to a high standard, and justly so. Many examples have been given today of where the West, in the construct that was used earlier, has failed to meet that standard. I would add to those the position of the people in Moldova, Georgia, and Ukraine. Their dream of prosperity and clean, accountable governance is being thwarted with impunity before our eyes. What encouragement this must provide to those who would thwart the deepening and broadening of democracy worldwide. Fourth and final lesson learned: leadership matters. The Club de Madrid is full of leaders who've made an historic difference. You've stood up to autocracy and resisted extremism. You've promoted equality and inclusion of the marginalised. Some people think that history is a series of accidents or simply the inevitable enactment of preordained events. But I think those of us who've participated in public life know that individual decisions of leaders actually matter. By your decisions and actions, you changed history. Today's challenges, as have been pointed out in the panel today and by President Tadic before in the previous panel, are even more insidious and difficult to meet than those that were met by leaders in the past. As we know, the system is heavily skewed to forcing short-term solutions to problems that are capable only of long-term answers. But the Club de Madrid can make a difference by working in partnership with like-minded organisations to develop the visionary democratic leaders of the next generation. And I certainly hope that that's something that UNDP can partner you with on. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Charles. And now we turn to Ingrid Stange, founder and chair of the Partnership for Change, and we're going to start exercising that partnership next year as well in Minnesota. So we moved from beautiful Florence to Minnesota. And if you guys don't do enough about climate change, it will be 35 degrees centigrade when we go to Minnesota in October next year. At least the weather will be nice enough. But please, Ingrid.
Okay, so I guess I stand between you and the drinks, so I'll be very, very quick. We can agree that the threats are immediate, and we agree on them, and we agree that they are comprehensive. It's all together, it's all mixed together. And we need to partner to solve these threats. And President Calderon asked the question and also answered it: is tackling climate change too expensive? Is it possible to do it? And my answer is, and I'm sure your answer also is, it's too expensive not to do it, because there is no business on a dead planet, and I would dare to say also there is no democracy on a dead planet. So we don't have a choice. And change takes place not only on the global and governmental level, it also, much of it takes place on the ground. So we also invite mayors, we invite business sectors, we invite individuals to take part in this in a way, process that we're leading up to the Minnesota 2015, where we also will co-organize with the Club de Madrid. Although I'm not from Minnesota myself, I'm sort of almost a Minnesotan since I'm Norwegian. I'm happy to invite you all, not only to Minnesota, but to the process leading up to the conference and the summit and the policy dialogues in Minnesota in October. And we are having three parallel processes. One is the next generation democracy process that has already started, and that's going to continue as we go along for the year towards October 2015. There's another process which we call the issue groups, where we have 9 issues, of which, of course, climate change is the first and foremost. But there are other issues related to the Sustainable Development Goals. These will be worked on parallel on a global basis, where we will have participants both inviting people from Club de Madrid and also from the community as such. And as a third response, actually, to what Ban Ki-moon asked to bring the youth in, we are going to have what we call an impact journey, which is going to be social media based. It's a hackathon, for those of you who know what that is. If you ask me to explain, I can't do it exactly. But I've been taking part in hackathons. It's sort of a youth-led, internet-based dialogue going on, where they come up with solutions that work. We know that there are many solutions out there, and many of them work. They can be scaled, they can be copied. We don't need to reinvent wheels. Let's look at what's already there. We all know, for example, solar power. We don't need much of the desert to place solar panels to solve the whole energy need for the world. We know that. Personally, I am partnering in a company that is trying to, or actually not trying, but actually succeeding in planting vegetables in the desert. It's working. So it's just about finding solutions, scaling them, copying them. So it is possible, but we need to partner. And so we are going to make a toolbox where these tools can be found, and this is what we're going to present in October 2015. And we have chosen the time very strategically, because it's after the General Assembly with the new Sustainable Development Goals, and it's before Paris. So we are coming up with solutions, as well as the policy suggestions from Club de Madrid and the Next Generation process. And we will be working on that as we go along. And I just have to remind you, all those of you who don't remember, earlier today I heard about Magna Carta, the Magna Carta that has been now going on for 800 years. Next year, Magna Carta celebrates 800 years. Maybe we need a new charter for humanity.
Yeah, all right. Thank you. Thank you. There's supposed to be some room for questions and answers. We'll be democratic. Who wants to do them here or do them at the drinks? Raise your hand for the drinks. Okay, we'll do it at the drinks. We're very democratic. Thank you, Vida. We have the closing remarks now. Thank you for this wonderful panel. I apologize. I think some of the panels may have been a little too jam-packed. Being in a university and seeing the young students walk outside and not be inside was sort of awkward. I hope in Minnesota we can bring them inside and talk to the next generation, because here I find that we're all 15. We're just 15 years old 3 or 4 times, and the young ones are outside. But let me bring Vida now to close this event. Thank you, and Vida, please come up. Or you want us to bring the microphone, Vida?
Gentlemen, you have been admirable in your patience and in your vim and vigor in participating in our debates. I'd like to thank you all for taking this time out of your lives and sharing here with each other your thoughts and your insights and your suggestions. This is the beginning of a beautiful friendship that we hope to continue under the theme of this year's conference, or rather policy dialogue, because that is the politically correct word that we should be using. And we do look forward to collaborating with you in the future, and of course, for the members of the Club de Madrid and also many specialists, to see you in lovely, cool Minnesota in October. It is my pleasant duty to remind you that we are here thanks to the wonderful collaboration and mutual support between the Club de Madrid and the Robert F. Kennedy Center for Justice and Human Rights. We have been supported generously by the Bertelsmann Stiftung in terms of their intellectual experience and capacity. And of course, we are most grateful to our gracious host here for the physical facilities, which is the European University Institute. I'd also like to remind you that this event can only take place because we do have friends and sponsors who help out with the material side of things, and these include the Slivka Foundation, Humanity United, Partnership for Change, and we will be working with them, of course, towards the 2015 meeting, Physicians Interactive, IXE, Kedrion, UniCredit, and Club de Madrid member, former Prime Minister of Andorra, Mr. Oscar Rivas. Thank you very much. We are most grateful to all who have contributed. As concluding words, yes, thank you, yes. We have been concentrating for several days on these two concepts that you see there, democracy and human rights, but also on the third concept of its decline and the new generation which hopefully should revive it. I started out at the beginning of this conference referring to the close link between democracy and human rights as being something that is linked to the very definition of what we call the human being. And that human rights are linked to democracy in that long process of developing an inclusive definition of what it means to be a human being, which is what the Club de Madrid has for many years been pursuing as a general idea of shared societies. Shared societies are such that do not have the I and thou difference between people as a basis for differences in rights. Humanity is marvelously varied and different in the buzzing, blooming diversity of its qualities. We are different in an infinity of parameters, and this is what makes for the richness and the attractiveness of humanity. But there's one thing that this does not mean. It means that we must not be unequal before the law. The whole concept of democracy was born together with the idea that diversity and difference should not be the basis for exclusion. It should, on the contrary, transcend all these differences so that we are all equal before the law. We have here, just on this panel here, you see faint suggestions of the sort of things where we do have to chip away at the things that do not quite correspond to this concept of equality of substance and of right as human beings. When we say the next generation, we seem to be implying sort of something that is akin to ageism. And when the Secretary General of the UN kindly reminds us to include the youth of the world as part of decision-making, he is absolutely right, of course. For too long, children had no rights at all. They were to be seen and not heard. One could beat children. They continue to be sexually abused in many parts of the world. And youth do not get a hearing also sufficiently in society. But that is not a reason for falling in the opposite extreme and indulging in the sort of ageism that we just heard today from the 77-year-old Pope Francis I, who in addressing the European Parliament in Strasbourg said that he was disappointed in Europe in having lost its positions of leadership in the world, and that Europe was like a sterile old grandmother. Now, as a grandmother myself and a European, you see, first of all, I think it's a bit offensive to us grandmothers from Europe. But it's an oxymoron on top of it, so it's an offense against language. Because you see, if you're a grandmother, by definition, you possibly cannot be sterile. But most significantly of all, I'm struck by the fact that he did not say that Europe was like a celibate, sterile, desiccated old man. So we still have a way to go. The other aspect that we've been looking at has been the means of governance. And basically, when we talk about democracy, we're talking about systems by which both resources and rights and power are shared among society. And yes, this goes back, at least in the Western world, it goes back to Plato's Republic, it goes through Hobbes' Leviathan, we have Machiavelli's The Prince, and we have any number of political theories ever since competing for support and attention among the populations of the world. Similarly, for economic theories, recipes for increasing prosperity, recipes for sharing it better, and so on and so forth. This is an ongoing process. Many of you have emphasized democracy is a process. It is not a finished thing. It is not something that was carved once like David and left there to be admired for centuries and centuries. The concept, yes, when it was born, was a marvelous thing that should be kept and nurtured and remembered. But it is something that should be in process. It is something that should evolve. And yes, new generations of democracy have been going on ever and ever. Compare 19th century Great Britain to what it is today. Look at the phases it's gone through in between. You do the same thing for all countries. When Paine wrote The Rights of Man, he was actually talking a lot about Great Britain and about the inequalities in the rights to vote, etc., etc. When we set up Europe as an example to the world, of course, we set it up as an example of what it has achieved, but you might say we could equally set it up as a negative example of what should not be done elsewhere in the world and mistakes that should not be repeated. But the reverse is also true. We have to learn from each other all across the globe. And this is the process in which you have been participating here, where the Club de Madrid hopes to continue. And ladies and gentlemen, if you have important things to say, why don't you write a brief essay about it and send it to the Club de Madrid, and we'll try and put it on our webpage. I think that the dialogue here has not allowed us to hear enough from the audience in terms of very interesting ideas that they have. There simply hasn't been the physical time for you to always express yourselves. Why don't we use those marvelous new technologies that we all refer to? And yes, do write a little essay or some op-ed piece and send it to the Club de Madrid. But most of all, I wish you all to continue in your efforts. You're all obviously committed Democrats, and may you flourish in all that you do. Thank you for being here.